Today, let's talk about one of our colonial Upchurches. In particular, I refer to John Upchurch I, who was a grandson of Michael Upchurch I, the original immigrant to come to America. This particular John Upchurch I was born in 1678 and lived until 1758. To give you a little perspective as to how the country was at that time, when he was born in 1678, this was only 71 years after the first city had been established in America, namely Jamestown. So you can imagine that the whole country was pretty much frontier country at that time. John Upchurch I is unique in that we start with him our family structure, and we say that he heads the John Upchurch I tribe in America. There were only two such tribes, one headed by John Upchurch I and another one headed by his brother. We go from these tribes to the next level, which is the branch, and from there to the clans. And you will all have remembered that you were supposed to look up which clan you belong to, because that helps us organize ourselves in the family. Let's take a look at the 5-generation chart and see how he fits into the family. You see here we start with Michael Upchurch, as I indicated, and his son Richard II going to the John Upchurch I, the person we speak of today, he being the grandson of Michael, and he being the grandfather of 5 clan heads: Edith, Harmon, James, John, and Selah. Now, why would you care how this particular individual fits in? Well, I would hope that if you belong to any of the 5 clans listed there, that you would believe that they are the grandchildren of this John Upchurch I. So therefore you become connected. He was then prominent as being the grandfather of 5 clan heads. Let's take a look at a sketch of his life, where he lived at different periods of times and for how long. As his father lived in Surry County, Virginia, that is where John Upchurch I was born in 1678, and he stayed there for 23 years until about 1701. He probably married there, and his first son, John Jr., was probably born there. Then he moved across the river to New Kent County and stayed there for 17 years, from 1701 to 1718. From there he moved back to Surry County for 27 years and lived there from 1719 to 1746. And from there in 1746 he bought a piece of property in what was the neighboring county, Isle of Wight. He bought a tract of land there which he held for only 3 years and then sold it. But while he held it, the counties were adjusted and a new county was formed, the county of Southampton. And you see on the map showing Surry County and Brunswick County that there's a double arrow there which shows about the point at which he would have owned land in this Southampton County, which was created out of Isle of Wight and Surry. Then late in his life, in 1749, he moved to Brunswick County, Virginia, where he lived out the rest of his life, living there for 9 years and dying in 1758. Of course, he joined many Upchurches who lived in Brunswick County as well. Now let's talk about New Kent County and the church that he was associated with when he moved across the James River. This is one of the rare occasions in which the Upchurches in the colonial period moved north rather than moving south and west. Let me tell you how you get to this church from Surry County, Virginia. You cross the river, James River, and you would be within sight of the little town of Jamestown. You go a little bit further north into the west, and there you find the St. Peter's Parish. which was a very old parish established in 1679. And the church there is called St. Peter's Parish Church. It, of course, would have been originally a Church of England establishment. And, of course, after the Revolutionary War, all of these Church of England churches were converted to Episcopal churches. So by the time when our ancestor got to this area of this church, he would have been worshiping in a Church of England church. Now, there are two particular reasons we want to focus on this church, the St. Peter's Parish Church. One of them is, of course, because our relative, John Upchurch I, was there for a number of years and cited on the record a number of times there. We'll get to that in a moment, but let me tell you another historic aspect of this community. And I'll start with a lady named Martha Dandridge, who, as a fairly young person, married an elderly person named Daniel Park Curtis. They had 4 children together, only 2 of which arrived at adulthood. He died in 1757, owning over 17,000 acres of land in the vicinity of that church. The widow, Martha, soon married in 1759 a very prominent individual we all know as George Washington, the first president of our country. They married in the vicinity, and they would have attended this church. As a matter of fact, our relative, John Upchurch I, could well have known Daniel Custis, as Daniel was born in 1711 in this community, and our ancestor or relative, John Upchurch I, arrived there in 1701. Now, I doubt that our relative operated in the same social circles as Daniel Custis, but he certainly could have seen him in passing, and probably they would have been in the same church together, although Daniel Custis was a much younger person than our relative. Now let's go to some of the specifics in this New Kent County where John Upchurch I lived, and I'll just give you a very quick thumbnail sketch. His children are shown on the parish records. Daughter Elizabeth was baptized in 1701, daughter Sarah baptized in 1704, daughter Tafina in 1707, and the record shows that his son John Jr. died in 1713. John was not very fortunate, and none of these 4 children listed survived to adulthood as far as we know. As I mentioned earlier, the son John Jr. had probably been born before the John Upchurch I moved to New Kent County. There are other records of John in the New Kent County record. He was paid 3,646 pounds of tobacco for work he did on the church. So he was a workman. In 1704, he paid quit rents on 60 acres of land. That was a form that the English monarchs allowed people to own land by just paying quit rent. They never owned the land. They just had to pay quit rents year after year after year and more or less act as if they did own it. So here you have our relative, John Upchurch I, really having to hold 2 jobs. Does that sound something like something new? He was a farmer, as he had this 60 acres, but he also was closely affiliated with the church and had did work for the church as a workman in some fashion. In 1705, he also is recognized in church records as having taken care of an illegitimate child. Now, we have no evidence that this child was related in particular to John, but he could have been. Then in 1706, he's given an award from the church for taking care of a parish child. So we see from this that John Upchurch I was closely associated with the church, and we can assume he was a pious individual. Now, on a strictly personal note, I'd like to comment that my wife and I, in December of 1989, were fortunate enough to visit this church. We were in Williamsburg on holiday, and decided to take a ride out into the countryside. We reached the church on a Sunday morning and walked up to the church door and tried to open it, but it was locked. We were somewhat disappointed, thinking we'll not get to see the inside of this church. But in fact, the church was in service, and someone heard us rattling the door and came and opened it, and we went inside and joined the service for that particular day. I can tell you that it is a quite elegant church from the standpoint of having been generated so early, and it is a prize of our country to have such a church surviving after all of these years. Now let's pick up with John Upchurch I leaving New Kent County and moving back to Surry County. He was in Surry then from 1718 to 1746. While there, in 1721, he evaluated the estate of one William Honeycutt who had passed away. Now we're tempted to think that this William Honeycutt could be related to the wife of John Upchurch I, whose name was Elizabeth Honeycutt. However, the records tell us that William did not have any children, so perhaps the wife of John Upchurch I was a niece of this individual. We come upon another strange thing in that the son of John Upchurch I, who survived, James Upchurch III, was born in 1724, and our records show he was born in Brunswick County, Virginia. But it seems strange that with John Upchurch I living in Surry County, that he would suddenly have a son be born in Brunswick County. Of course, he could have traveled over and been there for a short time, but we need to do more research on that. Then in 1746, John bought 100 acres of land in Isle of Wight County, which adjoins Surry County. He held that land only for a short time, but in the meantime, a new county was formed by the name of Southampton County. And so the land that he owned, which had originally been in Isle of Wight County, was now found in Southampton County. Then he moved to Brunswick County in 1750, right after he had sold his land in Southampton. And there misfortune begins to accumulate. And he was sued numerous times. And in fact, it reached the point where his son, James Upchurch III, had to appear in court and defend him, and in fact was ordered by the court to sell all of John Upchurch III's, John Upchurch I's goods to pay debts. That's an unfortunate circumstance. He died there in Brunswick County in 1758 as an 80-year-old man, and we can feel that he must have had some pretty good genes. Let's recap what we have with this colonial Upchurch. We're delighted that we've got so many facts in the record that support his existence and tell us where he was at particular times. And we know that he may have married twice, with his first wife being Eleanor, but that's somewhat uncertain. We have omitted the names of numerous associates and neighbors and the names of streams in this brief recap of this individual, but those bits of information are extremely important to us to do further research and flesh out what we know about John Upchurch I. As mentioned earlier, he had only one son, James Upchurch III, who went on to produce children, and actually he had 5 children who were heads of clans. We might say about John Upchurch I, as he went from success to misfortune, he was a well-documented colonial Upchurch ancestor, and I hope we can learn more about him in due course.